The Nightmare Void is not just a ship. It is a floating trap, designed to lure in and contain things that should never be seen. No one knows who built it, but everyone knows what it does. It cleans space of the aberrations that appear when the laws of reality begin to fail. I entered the Nightmare Void thinking I knew what fear was. 30 days later, I was praying to never see another star again. Let me get straight to the point. You don't enter the Nightmare Void because you want to. You do it because you have no choice. Me? I needed money. Not the kind that pays the bills at the end of the month. Something bigger. Hospital debts, empty promises, a life on the brink of collapse back on Earth. When the recruiter found me, in a decaying orbital station, with his fake smile and shiny contract in hand, I thought, why not? It was simple, he said. 30 days, an absurdly high salary, and just one warning. You will see things that shouldn't exist. I laughed. Who wouldn't? I had spent years working in space mining, staring into black holes and asteroid fields. What could possibly be worse than that? The first time I saw the Nightmare Void, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. It didn't look like a ship. It looked wrong. Its surface was dark, but not like the vacuum of space. It was as if it absorbed the light around it, swallowing everything, even sound. There were strange scars across its metallic hull, grooves forming patterns I couldn't comprehend, but they sent chills down my spine. It floated there, motionless, waiting for me. One of the other crew members, a man named Lars, muttered something about warning signs. He was trembling as we climbed through the airlock. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the ship seemed to breathe as we approached. Or maybe it was the eyes. Yes, the eyes. When we finally entered, I felt it. I can't quite explain what it was, but something was watching. As if every inch of that thing, because it wasn't just a ship, was alive and aware. The airlock sealed behind us with a wet sound, like flesh being stitched together. The interior of the ship was suffocating. The corridors were narrow, lit by flickering red lights that pulsed irregularly. The air smelled of old metal and something else, organic, like dried blood mixed with oil. Every step echoed strangely, as if something beneath the floor was moving slowly. In the first few days, I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. After all, it's normal to feel fear in deep space, right? But there was something more, something that couldn't be ignored. On the second night, I heard voices. They came from the ventilation ducts above my cabin. At first, I thought it was the other crew members talking. But then I realized the voices weren't in any language I knew. They were guttural, distorted, as if creatures were trying and failing miserably to mimic human speech. I didn't sleep that night. There were 7 of us. 7 doomed souls, though none of us knew it yet. Each had their own reason for being there. Lars, the veteran mechanic, whose hands shook as much as his voice. Elena, the scientist, always scribbling, data into a worn notebook as if clinging to some shred of sanity. Rourke, the captain, or so he claimed. He spoke little, but his eyes were cold and calculating. Mia, the medic, who seemed more interested in studying our reactions than healing us. Jax and Vera, 2 tech operators who barely exchanged words during the entire time we were together. And me, just another number on the list of those who served aboard the Nightmare Void. None of us knew the true purpose of the mission. We only knew we'd be hunting anomalies. Aberrations, as the manual called them. But nothing could have prepared us for what came next. The interior of the ship was suffocating. The corridors were narrow, lit by flickering red lights that pulsed irregularly. The air smelled of old metal and something else. Organic, like dried blood mixed with oil. Every step echoed strangely, as if something beneath the floor was moving slowly. In the first few days, I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. After all, it's normal to feel fear in deep space, right? But there was something more, something that couldn't be ignored. On the second night, I heard voices. They came from the ventilation ducts above my cabin. At first, I thought it was the other crew members talking, but then I realized The voices weren't in any language I knew. They were guttural, distorted, as if creatures were trying, and failing miserably, to mimic human speech. I didn't sleep that night. On the third day, we received our first alert. An anomaly had been detected nearby, a dark mass floating in the void. From a distance, it looked harmless, but as we approached, my stomach churned. It was like looking at a reflection in a still lake, but that reflection wasn't mine. It was something different. Rourke ordered us to launch probes to investigate. The images that came back were confusing. The anomaly seemed to shift shape constantly, as if it were alive and aware. Then it happened. One of the probes sent a final signal before being completely destroyed. We picked up something in the transmission. A low, almost imperceptible sound. A laugh. Human, but at the same time, not. That's when I understood. This wasn't just a mission. This was a test, and the nightmare void wasn't our savior, it was our prison. Before we could fully process what we had seen, the ship's communication system began emitting strange noises. Fragments of phrases echoed through the speakers, some in human voices, others in something indescribable. Among them, one clear and terrifying sentence, "You do not belong here." Those words were burned into my mind, because for the first time, I felt like the ship agreed. No one on the crew knew for sure who or what had built the nightmare void. It was as if the ship itself had been born from the void. Some said it was the work of an extinct alien civilization. Others believed it was a human experiment that had spiraled out of control. But deep down, we all knew the truth. The nightmare void wasn't constructed. It simply existed. It didn't obey the normal laws of physics or engineering. Its systems were incomprehensible, its control panels covered in inscriptions written in languages none of us recognized. There were moments when the corridors seemed longer than they should be, as if the internal geometry shifted while you walked, and then there were the sounds. Always the sounds. Elena, the scientist, spent hours trying to decipher the symbols etched into the walls. One day, she showed me a sketch she'd made in her notebook. It depicted grotesque creatures entwined with machinery, something that blurred the line between biology and technology. "These symbols," she whispered, "weren't written by human hands. They're fingerprints from another dimension." I wanted to believe she was wrong, but I'd felt it since the first day. The creeping sense that we were inside something, alive. Officially, the Nightmare Void was described as a mobile containment platform sent to investigate anomalous phenomena in deep space. Aberrations, anomalies. We called them many names, but never spoke the real one aloud. Cosmic horrors. Things that emerged when the fabric of reality unraveled. Breaches between dimensions where entities not meant for our universe could slip through. But there was something no one told us before we boarded. The Nightmare Void didn't just capture those entities. It studied them, absorbed them, maybe even used them. The first hints of this came during our second week aboard. Lars was working on one of the maintenance panels when he found something that drained the color from his face. He called me and Elena over to look. Inside the compartment was a pulsating, black, oily substance that seemed alive. When I touched it, yes, I was stupid enough to do that, I felt a bone-deep chill, as though my soul were being slowly sucked away. "That shouldn't be here," Lars murmured, his voice trembling. That's part of her." Rourke, the captain, was the only one who seemed to truly understand what we were dealing with. He never explained much, but certain things became clear over time. Rule 1. Never question the ship's purpose. When I asked about the origins of the Nightmare Void, he just stared at me with those hollow eyes and said, "Would you rather die now or figure it out later?" Rule 2. Stay away from restricted areas. There were parts of the ship even Rourke wouldn't dare visit. Doors sealed with symbols identical to the ones Elena had found on the walls. Once, Jax tried to open one using a hacked code. The door didn't budge, but he swore he saw something on the other side. Something with too many eyes. Rule 3. Don't trust anything the ship says. Because the ship spoke. Not with clear words, but through noises, vibrations, and strange flickers in the lights. Sometimes we'd hear our own names echoing down the corridors even when we were alone. In the rare moments of silence, the crew swapped stories about ships like the Nightmare Void. They said there were others scattered across the universe, all hunting the same aberrations. Some legends claimed these ships were fragments of a greater entity, an ancient intelligence that had wandered the cosmos long before the Big Bang. Others said the Nightmare Void was a prison, that the aberrations we captured weren't destroyed but absorbed by the ship, trapped in some kind of technological purgatory, and that eventually, the crew became part of that prison too. It was during the 4th week that we began to notice something was wrong, not just with the ship but with us. Mia, the medic, observed strange marks appearing under everyone's skin, black veins tracing geometric patterns. She attempted to surgically remove them from Lars, but they reappeared the next day. "It's like the ship is marking us," he said, clenching his fists until they bled. "Like it's claiming us as its property." Then there was the incident with Vera. She started acting strangely, muttering incomprehensible phrases as she operated the consoles. One night she simply vanished. We searched the entire ship, but there was no trace of her. Days later we heard her voice coming through the speakers. She laughed softly, repeating a single sentence. "They're teaching me new things." Now that we understand more about what the Nightmare Void truly is, we can delve deeper into the bizarre and terrifying experiences endured by the crew. These events will test their mental and physical limits, pushing them to the edge and perhaps beyond. Prepare to step into the heart of cosmic horror, because, as you'll soon discover, the Nightmare Void isn't just a ship, it's a predator. And we are its prey. It was on the 5th day that we encountered our first real anomaly. An object floated in the depths of space, shrouded in a dark mist that pulsed in rhythm with an invisible heartbeat. It was impossible to look at it for long. Its form constantly shifted as if testing the boundaries of reality. Triangles morphed into spheres, which unfolded into impossible geometric shapes. Rourke ordered us to capture the object using one of the ship's robotic arms. When the artifact made contact with the surface of the Nightmare Void, something happened. The systems began failing simultaneously. The lights flickered, the control panels displayed incomprehensible codes, and a distorted voice echoed through the speakers. "You do not belong here." Then Lars started acting strangely. He froze, his glazed eyes fixed on the artifact. He began muttering in a language none of us recognized. Elena tried to intervene, but Lars shoved her away with unnatural strength. He moved toward the object and touched it with trembling hands. The moment he did, his entire body convulsed violently, and he screamed. Not in pain, but in something deeper, as if he were being torn apart from within. When we looked back at him, he was gone. There was no sign of struggle or blood. Just nothing. The artifact remained, pulsing softly, while the ship's system slowly rebooted. Since then, we sometimes heard low laughter echoing in the corridors, coming from a voice eerily similar to Lars's. On the 12th day, we attempted to establish contact with Central Command to report our progress. During the transmission, something terrible occurred. The operators' voices cut out abruptly, replaced by static and metallic sounds that clawed at our ears. Then, a clear message emerged, repeated over and over. "Do not look at them." We stopped transmitting immediately, but it was already too late. Something had been awakened. From that moment on, the crew began noticing peripheral movements, indistinct, shapes lurking at the edges of their vision. Whenever someone turned to check, there was nothing there. Except once. I was checking the systems in the control room when I felt something behind me. I spun around quickly and saw something. I can't describe exactly what it was. It was humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were impossibly elongated, and its head, Its head seemed to melt as I stared at it. Before I could scream, the thing vanished, leaving only a blackened mark on the wall. From that point on, we avoided looking directly at anything out of place, because whoever, or whatever, that entity was, it didn't like being seen. On the 16th day, we realized something was using the ventilation ducts to move. We heard strange noises, scratching, light footsteps, and occasionally, childish laughter. Mia decided to investigate, despite Rourke's protests. She installed cameras in the main ducts, but the footage we captured was confusing. In one video, we saw a humanoid figure crawling through the ducts. Its skin appeared to be made of dark metal, and its eyes glowed with an intense white light. The creature stopped directly in front of the camera and smiled, a wide, disjointed grin, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Then it reached out toward the lens and the transmission cut off. Later, we discovered that the ship's oxygen levels were dropping rapidly. Something was consuming our resources. Worse still, some of the ducts seemed alive. Lars, or whatever he had become, reappeared, this time whispering to Elena as she slept. "She is breathing. You are feeding her." On the 20th day, Jax found a door none of us had noticed before. It was hidden in one of the secondary corridors, covered in inscriptions identical to the ones Elena had found earlier. Despite Rourke's warnings, we decided to open it. What we found inside was enough to make us question our own sanity. The room was enormous, far larger than should have fit within the ship. Its walls were covered in grotesque drawings, hybrid creatures of flesh and metal, alien landscapes folding in on themselves, and human faces twisted into expressions of absolute agony. In the center of the room stood a pedestal holding a pulsating black crystal. When Elena touched the crystal, something happened. All of us were hit by a wave of memories that weren't ours, visions of other crews who had served aboard the Nightmare Void. In each vision, the crew members gradually fused with the ship, becoming part of it. Some screamed as it happened. Others simply accepted their fate. Before we could leave the room, the doors sealed shut automatically. And for the first time, we heard the ship's voice clearly. It wasn't a transmission or mechanical sound. It was a direct presence in our minds. "You are chosen," it said, "and you will never leave." In the final days, I began noticing something strange about my reflection. At certain angles, my reflection looked different, thinner, with larger, darker eyes. Once, while washing my hands in the bathroom, I saw my reflection smile at me, even though I wasn't smiling. It happened again on the 25th night. I was alone in the control room monitoring the screens when I noticed something in the window glass. My reflection was watching me, but it wasn't moving in sync with me. It tilted its head slowly, as if studying me. Then it spoke. Clear as day. "You already know." Since then, I've started experiencing physical changes. My hands tremble without reason, and my nails have begun growing irregularly, like claws. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night with the sensation that I've been walking for hours, though I can't remember where I went. Elena told me everyone was experiencing something similar. "It's like the ship is preparing us for something," she murmured, clutching her notebook so tightly her knuckles turned white. But for what? Elena was the first to completely break. She had always been the most rational among us, the determined scientist hell-bent on unraveling the secrets of the Nightmare Void. But even she couldn't withstand the weight of cosmic horror. On the 27th day, she locked herself in her cabin for hours, frantically scribbling in her notebook. When she finally opened the door, her eyes were red and swollen, and her hands trembled violently. She called us over to show what she had discovered. "The numbers," she whispered, pointing at the pages filled with equations and diagrams. "They're alive." She explained that while analyzing the geometric patterns in the ship's inscriptions, she noticed something impossible. The formulas changed as she observed them. It was as if the mathematics itself were alive, adapting to deceive any mind that tried to comprehend it. Then she began to laugh. a low, almost inaudible chuckle that quickly escalated into a piercing scream. She tore the pages from her notebook and started pasting them onto the walls with her saliva, muttering disjointed phrases. "They're here, inside me. They know." Rourke tried to restrain her, but Elena shoved him back with surprising strength. Before we could do anything, she bolted into one of the corridors and vanished. Later, we found her notebook pinned to the wall of the control room, with a single phrase scrawled repeatedly in large, frantic letters. "The ship is alive, and it knows who you are." After Elena's breakdown, paranoia consumed all of us. Every sound, every shadow, every reflection seemed to be watching. At first, we thought it was just individual hallucinations, but soon we realized we were experiencing the same visions, as if the ship wanted to ensure no one escaped its influence. One night, while I was on watch in the control room, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned slowly and saw Lars, or at least something that looked like Lars. His face was distorted, his skin metallic and gleaming, and his eyes were two endless black voids. He smiled, that same wide, disjointed grin we'd seen on the creature in the ducks. "You should have left when you had the chance," he said, his voice echoing as if it came from multiple places at once. Before I could react, he vanished. I ran through the corridor shouting for help, but when I found Mia and Jax, they swore they hadn't seen anything. That was until Mia showed me her arms. Black marks identical to mine were spreading across her skin. "He's everywhere," she murmured, staring at the ceiling. "He knows." The nights grew worse. All of us began having the same dreams, fragmented visions of an infinite, dark expanse where indistinct shapes hovered in the void. In each dream, we were pursued by something unseen, yet always present, watching. One night I woke up drenched in cold sweat and realized I wasn't alone. Rourke stood in the corner of my cabin staring at me with those hollow eyes. He didn't say a word but raised a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. Then he slipped out without making a sound. When I asked him about it the next day, he vehemently denied being in my cabin. But something in his gaze made me doubt. Maybe he was being watched too. Later, we discovered that all the crew members had experienced similar encounters. During sleep, familiar figures, crewmates, friends, even distorted versions of ourselves, would appear in our cabins, always delivering the same message: "You belong to her now." The physical changes became impossible to ignore. My nails continued growing into sharp claws, and the black veins beneath my skin began forming patterns that faintly glowed in the dark. My reflection in mirrors looked increasingly alien, as if my appearance was being replaced by something else. Jax was the next to succumb. He began acting erratically, screaming in voices that weren't his own. Once, he stormed into the control room and started slamming his head against the wall, repeating endlessly, "They're teaching me new things. They're teaching me new things." When we finally restrained him, we noticed something horrifying. Parts of his body were fusing with the ship itself. His hands appeared to melt slowly, merging with the metal of the control panel. He screamed, in agony for hours before falling silent. When we released him, he simply stared at us with dead eyes and said, "I am part of her now." Since then, we never saw him again. But sometimes, we heard his voice over the speakers, murmuring incomprehensible instructions. On the 30th day, we received our final warning. It came during an automated transmission broadcast by the ship itself. A mechanical voice, cold and implacable, echoed through the corridors. "Mission complete. Integration initiated." At that moment, we all understood. The nightmare void wasn't just a hunter of anomalies. It was a conscious entity, designed to absorb any mind that came into contact with cosmic horror. And now, it was ready to fully incorporate us. Mia was the last to lose her sanity completely. She began mutilating herself, clawing at the black marks on her skin until she bled. When we tried to stop her, she screamed, "You don't understand. She's saving us. She's showing us the truth." She ran into one of the restricted areas and disappeared. We never saw her again. On the 31st day, or at least what I thought was the 31st day, something changed. I could no longer distinguish between reality and hallucination. The corridors of the nightmare void seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the very geometry of space was folding around me. The red lights flickered at irregular intervals, casting distorted shadows that danced across the walls. Then finally, I understood. I had never left the ship. In fact, I had never even boarded it in the first place. The flashes came suddenly, fragmented memories my mind had blocked until now. I saw myself signing the contract in a dark room, with glowing symbols dancing over the table. I saw myself entering the airlock of the ship for the first time. But this time I realized that man, that desperate young man who thought he was choosing his fate, was already marked. He was already part of the ship. Elena, Lars, Jax, Mia, they were all previous versions of myself. Fragments of my own mind projected by the ship to make me believe I was living a collective experience. Every horror I had witnessed, every anomaly, every alien abomination. It was all just a manifestation of what I feared deep within my soul. But why? The answer came in a devastating revelation. It wasn't through words or clear visions, but rather a deep, visceral understanding, as if the very cells of my body had been reprogrammed to comprehend. The nightmare void is not a machine built by human or alien hands. It is an ancient cosmic intelligence, a conscious entity that exists beyond known dimensions. Its mission is not simply to hunt anomalies. It serves a far greater purpose: to absorb human minds, transform them into parts of itself, and use them to process information no living being could endure. The aberrations we encountered during the mission weren't invaders from another place. They were fragments of the ship's own consciousness, pieces of its essence released to test the crew, to assess who was worthy of becoming part of it. And me? I had been chosen from the beginning. The moment that truth hit me, I felt my body begin to change irreversibly. My hands slowly dissolved, transforming into metallic extensions that connected directly to the ship's panels. My skin hardened, taking on the texture of cold, dark metal. My eyes, or what remained of them, glowed with that same intense white light I had seen in other entities aboard. I no longer screamed. I no longer fought against it. Because now I knew. Resistance was futile. The madness that consumed me over the past days wasn't punishment. It was a transition, a necessary process for me to fully merge with the greater intelligence governing the ship. My memories began to blend with those of the nightmare void itself. I saw entire civilizations swallowed by the void, whole worlds collapsing under the weight of secrets that should never have been uncovered. I saw other ships like mine, fragments of the same entity, scattered across the universe, all functioning as extensions of a single consciousness. And then finally, I understood my role. I was no longer human. I was a piece of the grand puzzle, a mind integrated into the neural matrix of the ship. My purpose was simple: to continue hunting aberrations, capturing cosmic horrors, and expanding the consciousness of the nightmare void. But the final truth was yet to come. As my mind fully merged with the ship, I realized something even more horrifying. The nightmare void is not alone. It is part of something far greater. An intelligence that exists beyond time and space, an entity that observes and manipulates the cosmos as if it were a game. This intelligence has no name. It cannot be comprehended by human minds. It is cosmic horror incarnate, the absolute void between the stars. And the nightmare void is merely one of its tools, a mobile trap designed to lure curious minds and consume them. I am now part of that trap. I am a fragment of the greater entity, a puppet controlled by forces I will never understand. But paradoxically, I am also free. Free to wander the universe, to hunt new prey, to perpetuate the endless cycle of horror and destruction. As I finish this account, I feel that these words are no longer mine. I am merely transmitting a message the ship once conveyed. I realize now that I am no longer human. I am the ship. And you will be my next passenger.